Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. We're going to talk a little bit about genetically modified bugs, mosquitoes in particular. We talked about that a little bit previous broadcasts earlier in the year. California wildfires, which they've been suffering a lot this year in regards to wildfires, and a little bit about antibiotic-resistant bacteria and how it's affecting people throughout the United States and, of course, the world. But first, we're going to start off with Florida and its plan to disperse 750 million mosquitoes into the wild to get the genetically modified mosquitoes that they have approved to take over the quote-unquote dangerous ones that can give you dengue fever, Zika, malaria, and so forth. The mosquitoes have been modified so that the females, that is the ones that bite, actually die before they reach maturity. The Florida Keys Mosquito Control District approved the plan to release those 750 million non-biting genetically engineered mosquitoes approved for release in the Florida Keys. Now, this will be done over a 2-year period starting in early 2021.
Well, the EPA approved the pilot project in May to see if this plan is a better alternative to spraying insecticide at a cost of nearly $1 million a year to control the type of mosquito that carries deadly viruses. Now, a U.S.-owned British-based company created the mosquito named OX5034, described as friendly mosquito technology. Now, the female offspring die in the larval stage before they can mature into the biting stage, and let's hope that it stays that way, that they don't get to the biting stage.
That's right. Well, this hasn't come without any pushback, though. J.D. Hansen, the policy director for the International Center for Technology Assessment and Center for Food Safety, said, with all the urgent crises facing our nation and the state of Florida, such as COVID-19 pandemic, racial injustice, and climate change, the administration has used tax dollars and government resources for a Jurassic Park experiment. Well, the mosquitoes has also been approved to be released also in Harris County, Texas next year as well. And over 230,000 people have signed a change.org petition to tell the EPA no to genetically modified mosquitoes.
Well, Californian weather is expected to produce more storms that can produce dry lightning added to the already growing wildfires as the state battles the second and third largest wildfires to date. Now, nearly 1.3 million acres burning and 14,000 firefighters battling the blazes. So far, the fire has burned over 500 square miles, an area 11 times the size of San Francisco, destroying nearly 900 structures and threatening 30,000 more. Now, one resident cautioned as more dry lightning is forecasted. She said, be extra ready, stay up all night, and have your phone plugged in next to you, kind of like be ready to leave immediately if should be.
Yeah, the fires displace a lot of people. Well, the entire Bay Area is under a red flag warning as the SCU fire has scorched over 340,000 acres and is still growing. South of there, about 100 miles, the CZU fire is destroying very ancient redwood trees from what many are calling human-caused climate change. Well, satellite images also show smoke from the blazes traveling thousands of miles away from their source.
All right, pretty amazing pictures there showing all that smoke from the fires. That's traveling to different states. Well, our field correspondent Larry McGee has more information for us on these California wildfires, what's being done, and just how much is actually being burnt. Larry, what details do you have for us?
The state of the planet and its healthy function is directly related to its human inhabitants and whether or not they are functioning healthily. Sick people make for a sick Earth, the likes of which are manifested in multiple symptoms of planetary dysfunction and displayed in various kinds and stages of environmental calamities, curses, and plagues. Among the most well-known of those is the self-inflicted blow of scorching heat, which is about as worse as it's ever been at present and growing towards its extreme worst with each passing day. This is almost the exact language being used by North California residents fleeing raging wildfires, who describe the times as weird as they recount the fact that at one point there was not fires every year in the region, but now there are fires every year and in record fashion. Fires in the nation's primary party state destroyed 800 homes and scorched 40,000 acres of land to start, but then soared to over 1 million acres and even greater damage as the conflagrations and their incendiary effects increased. The planet is electric, and thunder is a necessary part of its electrification, but the beating inflicted upon the planet's hydraulic systems through intimate indiscretions and physical immorality has bruised and damaged the Earth's original moisture levels, so that what should have been a blessing and a benefit is instead igniting into an infernal plague and a curse. Speaking of plagues, the nations are now starting to revisit their assessment methods concerning the unprecedented curse of corona. Here's a video detailing their experience learning the hard way.
Let's talk about the pandemic, what we got wrong and what we know now. Back in the day, most experts thought people who felt fine couldn't spread the disease. We were told wearing masks wouldn't really protect us. And kids, well, a few who got COVID-19 also got sick with a weird inflammatory disease that no one saw coming.
It's such a fast, quickly evolving field. Every day we learn something new.
So why has it been so tough to understand how this virus works? What have we learned in the last 6 months? And what can we do about the super spreaders? Scientists get stuff wrong all the time. It's just how science works. Someone does a study, publishes it, and then others either confirm the results or point out the mistakes. But that stuff takes time. And when the pandemic started, time wasn't on anyone's side. Some used to think the virus was like the flu, which thrives in winter.
Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
Weather patterns may play a factor in the spread of COVID-19.
But the WHO now says the virus likes all seasons.
There seems to be this persistent belief that summer is not a problem. Summer is a problem.
They're pointing to the US, where it's summer and cases are through the roof. And there's a lot we're still finding out. Why some people suffer long-term effects like heart damage or what they're calling brain fog. And there have also been some pretty big oversights. These days, the experts say that the spread by people who seem fine was hugely underestimated. Infectious people who are asymptomatic, in other words, they never show any symptoms, can still spread it. So can people who are pre-symptomatic, meaning they're infectious before they develop any symptoms. And together, they account for about 40% of all transmissions. Back in February, when we did our first episode on the virus, experts just couldn't agree. China's National Health Commission said that a person without symptoms is still infectious, which is pretty scary. But the WHO backed away from that and said the most common way of getting the virus is from people who are already visibly sick. The WHO got it wrong, though. Even as late as June, they said it wasn't really happening.
They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission on what is very rare.
Very rare. With those two words, the WHO opened itself up to a world of media pain.
The mixed messages leaving many frustrated.
What is the bottom line? Can asymptomatic people spread COVID-19?
Yes. That's why this is like, I'm sorry, what? What do you, how can you, we gotta get this right, everybody.
A leading medical journal has now spelled it out, saying there is ample evidence that people without symptoms may be the critical driver. It's taken a while to understand that most people spread the virus to only a few others or no one at all. And then there are the super spreaders, a small number of infected people, about 10 to 20%, who scientists think are responsible for around 80% of transmissions. They're still trying to work out why, but a huge factor is who and what's around us. Scientists talk about the 3 C's: close interactions, crowded spaces, and closed-off environments without proper ventilation.
I think where you see these kind of features together, you're more likely to have a super spreading event.
Those 3 C's, close, crowded, and closed-off conditions, matter because of how the virus travels. Early on, scientists were confident it moved through the air in micro-droplets. It's what we reported in April. You can catch it from someone coughing, sneezing, or even speaking a little too close to you. But what if those droplets linger? Well, now it looks like they may linger and travel even farther than we thought. In a letter sent to the WHO in July, more than 230 scientists warned that the virus inside those tiny droplets can potentially travel not just 1 or 2 meters, but tens of meters. Lydia Morawska was one of those scientists.
Think, for example, on many occasions, how far from a person smoking you can smell cigarette smoke. So this is the same mechanism for the virus. It travels with the air current.
Which brings us to how we can protect ourselves indoors. Masks help stop the spread. Those droplets aren't going anywhere with a mask covering your mouth and nose. But back in February, the WHO wasn't so sure.
There is no evidence that they protect people who are not sick.
That just wasn't right. In fact, scientists say that had people started wearing masks earlier, it would have helped.
Think of a crowded bus where people are like sardines next to each other. So ventilation on its own won't help if you are standing for half an hour next to somebody sneezing or coughing at you. So in environments like this, masks are the only solution.
If we could get everybody to wear a mask right now, I really do think over the next 4, 6, 8 weeks, we could bring this epidemic under control.
And yet we've still got people who refuse to wear one.
You're coming close to me. You're coming close to me.
Most of those really strong antibiotic-resistant bugs are opportunistic. What that means is that they're just looking for the opportunity to cause disease when the host is in some kind of weakened state. What that means is that they're just looking for the opportunity to cause disease when the host is in some kind of weakened state.
The host being the thousands of hospital patients fighting coronavirus. Now it's combining with antibiotic-resistant bacteria to make people even sicker.
You pick up these bugs in the hospital, you end up getting a secondary infection because you're not as able to fight off disease anymore. And then there's no antibiotics that can treat you.
That powerful 1-2 punch of virus and bacteria sometimes cannot be stopped because many antibiotics simply don't work anymore, rendering them useless in knocking out secondary infections. After years of doctors overprescribing antibiotics and studies warning against overusing hand sanitizers, the drugs no longer work as well against superbugs or secondary infections in corona patients. Meanwhile, doctors are working on this super tolerance to superbugs. Rice University, for example, is researching something called nanodrills that pierce the outside shell of bacteria and deliver drugs right to the source.
It's very selective, and they die by exploding. You punch holes in them, and then the cells just bleb, boom.
And there are other methods to kill bacteria, such as ultraviolet or UV light. Scientists have some cautionary advice.
Use them in a better way so that we don't induce antibiotic resistance in all the bacteria that we come in contact with.
Rather than lifestyle changes, the option of first choice seems consistently to be pharmaceutical concoctions, even though their efforts at chemical magic consistently result in mutative failure. Such has also become the case with the coronavirus, which is creating allies now among the opportunistic superpowers or superbugs of the micro world, which will undoubtedly include information sharing that will further work to ensure its unstoppable march. Recently, information has begun to surface regarding the pseudo or copycat symptoms of the virus in a victim who was recovering from the affliction after grappling with the malady and its lingering effects for approximately 5 months, reinforcing then the assertion of certain experts concerning the lifespan of the virus, that it does in fact live and produce illness within an infected person for 5 months. Here's an informative video explaining the intelligence of the micro-kingdoms and how dangerous things can get when those kingdoms are altered from their original state and their intelligence is invested instead into processes which are detrimental to mankind as opposed to beneficial.
What if I was to tell you that a secret war has been going on, a war fought simultaneously on a global and a microscopic level? We all came late to this war, and despite what we might like to think, we are in over our heads. Bacteria are frequently opportunists, meaning that they wait until we are vulnerable to attack and cause disease or infection. Meaning that they wait until we are vulnerable to attack and cause disease or infection. For example, 100 years ago, the Spanish influenza virus swept across the world in a devastating pandemic, leaving tens of millions dead in its wake. It's said to have killed the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time. But actually, many of these deaths were caused by bacterial pneumonia that attacked a population made vulnerable by the influenza virus. Despite cases like this, for much of history, bacteria have been held in a sort of balance by naturally occurring antibiotics. But the discovery of penicillin in 1928 and its subsequent clinical use disturbed this balance and changed the tide of the war. We had a new magic bullet in our fight against bacterial infections. Problems that were once potentially fatal were now just minor inconveniences. Antibiotics are designed to fit into a certain part of the bacterial cell, much like a key is designed to fit into a lock. When a bacterial cell encounters an antibiotic, it's got really two options. One, it dies. The second option is that it evolves, it mutates, it survives. In evolving, it's essentially changing the shape of the lock so that the antibiotic key can no longer fit and is therefore no longer effective. Our options then are either to alter the key to fit the new shape of the lock, make a new key to fit that same lock, or just target an entirely different lock. The problem that we face is that we have a relatively limited selection of antibiotics, and bacteria are incredibly good at adapting and evolving. Many common bacterial species actually replicate so quickly that one starting cell can become almost 300 trillion cells in just 24 hours. And every single one of those cells has had the chance to mutate and evolve, potentially to become resistant to antibiotics. Due to us using antibiotics so much in recent history, bacteria are encountering them much more frequently and at much higher concentrations than would naturally happen. This has meant that many species now are resistant to not just one or two antibiotics at once, but to many or even all available antibiotics. These highly resistant bacteria are called superbugs, and they're becoming increasingly common. We're seeing a resurgence of dangerous bacterial infections that we thought were a thing of the past. In America, this year, public health officials have found the Yersinia pestis bacteria hiding on the spiny backs of fleas. That is the exact same bacteria that caused the Black Death 700 years ago. In Australia and many other countries, we're seeing untreatable cases of gonorrhea, and a lot of people don't actually get symptoms, so can unwittingly pass this untreatable infection onto others. In the Northern Territory, there's an ongoing case study of a patient who's had the same bacterial infection for 17 years, continually evolving to evade treatment, and with nasty symptoms similar to tuberculosis. New antibiotics are being developed, but we face a conundrum. The more we develop, the more resistant the bacteria eventually become. In fact, it's been estimated that by 2050, antibiotic resistance will have cost us 300 million lives. So we need a new way to deal with these bacteria, a way that focuses on the source of the problem. So we need a new way to deal with these bacteria, a way that focuses on the source of the problem.
For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like people are really totally out of the woods in regards to COVID-19, even after their 10 or 14-day time period. They're still kind of in that area where they can be reinfected. Well, as we've been covering the growing tensions between Russia and the United States, there is new reason to believe things will get even more intense. Now, President Vladimir Putin has ordered massive snap military drills in its southwestern region. The drills, are involving about 150,000 troops and require their top military equipment, including armored vehicles and 106 naval ships.
Well, this is truly a huge show of strength, utilizing 35 different ranges for the exercise so the Russian military can flex its military muscles. Now, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, the goal of the exercises are to prepare soldiers to defend the southwestern area of the country from terrorist threats.
Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu confirmed this in a statement saying, "These drills are intended to valor the armed forces' readiness and to ensure military security in Russia's southwest, where serious terrorist threats remain." But there are even larger military drills yet to come. These SNAP drills will help Russia prepare for the Caucasus 2020 drills, which are scheduled to take place in September.
Well, we want to end this report by revisiting one of our main topics, the alarming fact that antibiotic-resistant bacteria has become the biggest health issue today. Now, because of this, something as simple as a tiny scratch can lead to a person's death. Now, in a real-life example this year, one woman from Pennsylvania almost lost her life from a urinary tract infection. Now, 8 million Americans get UTIs every year, but this woman's UTI was caused by a new deadly drug-resistant bacteria.
Antibiotic resistance is one of the most serious health threats we face today, said Dr. Thomas Frieden, director of the CDC, in an interview with CBNnews.com. He also said, "We risk entering a post-antibiotic era where even simple infections can be deadly."
A former Food and Drug Commissioner, Peter Pitts, agrees with Freeman as he spoke with CBN News, warning, "Shame on us if we wait for there to be bodies in the streets before we step up to the plate and really begin to address this situation."
Antibiotics have been thought of as a hero for the last 70 years, fighting some of the worst bacterial infections like E. coli, Staphylococcus, and even the Black Plague. However, doctors are saying the strains of bacteria they are fighting today are stronger and more resilient to antibiotics than ever and cannot be killed by them. As was mentioned earlier in our report, the bacteria, of course, are labeled superbugs and infect about 2 million Americans annually, as well as kill 23,000.
Well, how did this problem arise in the first place? Well, Mr. Pitt says superbugs are a result of doctors overprescribing antibiotics. Now, antibiotics only work to fight bacterial infections. However, the largest group of patients a doctor will see have viral infections. So, different than a bacterial infection, most of them have viral infections. Now, viral and bacterial infections are two very different species in the medical field, and this is where the problem began. Because patients are looking for a cure to their ailment, whatever its origin, doctors will often prescribe an antibiotic even when it won't really help.
Mr. Pitts gives us a common scenario. He said, when a patient comes in, or a mom or a dad or a mother or father, and the child is crying and screaming, and the parent wants a prescription, and they don't know what antibiotics to use, they just broadly use something that might be of value. Doctors think to themselves, I know that an antibiotic is not going to help this child, but it will give the parent what they want, and it's not going to do any harm. And the fact is, Mr. Pitts says, it does tremendous harm.
Because now these super bacteria are getting smart and changing their locks so the antibiotic key will not fit anymore, and they can continue multiplying and causing harm. Well, there is only one resource left in the medical world for those who have contracted these superbugs today, and that's the antibiotics of last resort. But these extremely strong drugs carry with them devastating side effects.
Well, Peter Pitts describes a person on this type of antibiotic to feeling so nauseous that they are unable to function and have to stay in bed because they have been completely brought down to their weakest state. He said, it's like having the worst flu you ever had for a very long time, hoping that it works. He added, a lot of times people who develop these antibiotic-resistant bacteria don't get treated one time. Doctors have to continually experiment with more and more potent antibiotics as a cocktail to find out what works.
So what these antibiotics do is severely disrupt the immune system, leaving patients vulnerable to future infections. And what's worse is where most people come in contact with these superbugs is hospitals. Now, Pitts explains a fairly healthy patient can enter the hospital for a routine operation and leave that same hospital with a life-threatening bacterial superbug that they then have to administer these extreme antibiotics to them for, which in turn can cause a patient to get very sick and in some cases not even cure the infection. And really what's interesting about all that is the intelligence that these bacteria have, that they're able to multiply, continue to change, as we just mentioned there, almost change the lock so that the antibiotic key that would or should take care of them isn't able to do so anymore.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, just thinking about, 50 to 100 or even 1,000 years ago, people's immune systems were much stronger than what they are now. But one thing that they didn't have were hospitals and all of these antibiotics that are in, foods and milks and vegetables and things like that. They weren't bombarded with these antibiotics that weaken the system, along with other human activities that bring down the system as well.
Right, and some of those human activities that you mentioned, Yisrael Hawkins of the House of Yahweh has been teaching and explaining the scriptures, and in listening to some of his messages, he explains that there are things that a person can do that would strengthen their immune system, but also that they need to avoid so that their immune system is not weakened. And those are some very interesting points that he makes. In fact, if you'd like to learn more about these topics, you can call, write, or email the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisraelhawkins.com, or yahwehsbranch.com. You can visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as mentioned before, don't forget the Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael program, which is the perfect aid to guide you in studying and understanding the Holy Scriptures. You can find those websites by going to yisraelsays.com and askyisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another informative message from Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.